If you could reach into the clockwork mechanisms of the world, could change the switches, to what day would you travel? What would you do? Could you change anything? When it comes to time travel, the paradoxes are endless. You have your grandfather paradox. If you were to travel back in time and murder your grandfather before he ever met your grandmother, you've never existed. If you've never existed, you never traveled back in time in the first place. Or the bootstrap paradox. If you were to send a copy of Hamlet back to Shakespeare, and Shakespeare copied it word for word, then who really wrote Hamlet? Hamlet has existed forever. Or my favorite paradox, predestination. The very thing you attempt to prevent, you caused. If you were to travel back to 1871 and try to prevent the Great Chicago Fire, you were the one that spooked the cow, that kicked over the lantern, that burnt down the entire city. The very thing you tried to prevent, you caused. You didn't prevent history, you fulfilled it. Which brings me to my favorite time travel story. Back in 2015, Art Bell, if you've never heard of him, look him up. He was doing this new show called Midnight in the Desert, and a caller called him. His name was Craig. And he said, Art, I have something I have to tell you. He's like, I got to lay the groundwork first. He's like, I'm in my 50s. I have a 20-something-year-old daughter, have no grandkids, but he has a collection of cars and motorcycles, and one of his favorites is a 31 Model A that him and his father had restored, and he has a 72 Honda XL 250, showroom condition, his favorite bike. Said, if anything ever happens to me, he's telling his daughter, out of all the stuff I have, I want you to keep these two. These are what's important to me. She's like, okay, I'll do it. He rides his little 250 down to the coffee shop, grabs his planner, goes inside, sits down to have a cup of coffee, and plan his day. In walks a young man, late 20s, early 30s, and right when he walks in, he's like, hey, whose little 72 250 is that out there? And Craig says, that's mine. He goes, I like the bike. I have one just like it. And Craig's like, oh, really? You know, you get bike guys, you're into that type of thing, and you start talking. And as they start talking, this young guy is talking about how he has that 72 XL 250. He also has a 31 Model A. They were from his grandfather. And this, Craig's all excited now. And as they're going through, they're talking car stuff. Craig is out of coffee, and he goes to get up to get more, and he says, hey, do you want a cup of coffee? Because the guy's just standing at the edge of his table. And he's like, no, I can't. I really should get going. But I have to tell you something first. And Craig's standing up at this point, and the guy looks right at him, and his eyes start to well up. He says, I can't tell you how I know this, but do not go to Alaska in October. And Craig's just like, this is crazy. We didn't talk about what I do for a living. And as he's telling him this, he says, look, I have to go. And he puts both hands on his shoulders and he says, don't go. And he leans in and he gives him a hug. And when he gives him a hug, he says something in his ear. And he pulls himself back and he said, remember that. And he turned and he walked out of the coffee shop. And what he said to Craig's mind's racing 1,000 miles a minute. You know, you're so taken aback by what was said, it's not really processing at the time. And no sooner than that guy walked out of the door, it clicked. He said, love you, Grandma. And Craig hurries up and he hustles out of the door and he rounds the corner. And as he's getting ready to round the corner, he sees this flash of light. And he even tells Art, look, I don't know what it was. It could have been the sun glinting off of the windshields of the car. But all I can tell you is for 250 feet, there was no place for that guy to go. And he said, he's a geologist. He said, wouldn't you know, just last week, a work order came across my desk to travel to Alaska in October. We don't know, we never heard back if he ever went or what happened. But that would be predestination. His grandson travels back in time to tell him not to travel to Alaska, and him doing so could have been the very reason Craig went. I hope you enjoyed the story. I think it's a fascinating one. Let me know what you think in the comments.